Tonight, we explore one of humanity's greatest intellectual adventures, the birth of philosophical thinking in ancient Greece. Take a moment to like this video and subscribe, especially if you enjoy these philosophical journeys. Let me know in the comments where you're joining us from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, perhaps light a candle, and let's ease into tonight's philosophical journey together. What if the world was not governed by the gods, but by patterns waiting to be understood? In the dawn of the 6th century BCE, early Greek thinkers wandered the coasts of Ionia, asking what the world was truly made of. Their search revealed a new insight, that nature could be explained through reason rather than myth. Picture, if you will, the bustling port city of Miletus, where merchants from across the Mediterranean gathered not only to trade goods, but to exchange ideas. Among them walked a man named Thales, who would become the first philosopher in the Western tradition. While others attributed lightning to Zeus's anger or earthquakes to Poseidon's fury, Thales gazed at the same phenomena and wondered, what if there were deeper, hidden patterns? What if the seemingly chaotic world actually followed laws we could discover? This was revolutionary. For generations, Greeks had explained the world through the adventures of anthropomorphic gods, beings who acted like humans but possessed superhuman powers. Thunder was the sound of Zeus's thunderbolts. The seasons changed because Demeter mourned her daughter. The sea moved because Poseidon was angry, but Thales and his successors in Miletus, Anaximander and Anaximenes, began to ask different questions. They sought what they called the arche, the fundamental principle from which all things arise. Thales proposed water as this primary substance, observing that moisture seemed to nourish all life. Anaximander suggested something even more abstract, an endless, unlimited mass he called the Apeiron. Anaximenes pointed to air as the source of all things. They disagreed on the details, but they shared something profound. They believed that reason, not divine intervention, could reveal the world's deepest truths. Today, we face similar moments when old explanations no longer satisfy and we seek deeper clarity. Consider how we once explained mental illness through moral failings or demonic possession, until we discovered neurochemistry and psychological patterns. Think about how we once attributed social inequalities to divine will until we began understanding systems and structures, or how we once explained human behavior through crude stereotypes until we explored the complex interplay of psychology, culture, and biology. Just as those Ionian philosophers challenged the mythological worldview of their time, we too must remain curious about the patterns beneath surface appearances. This insight encourages viewers to question inherited beliefs and explore reality with fresh curiosity. What assumptions do you hold that might benefit from a similar philosophical examination? And so we find ourselves at the beginning of our journey, standing at the threshold where myth yields to reason, where wonder transforms into systematic inquiry. The ancient Greeks discovered that beneath the chaos of appearances lies an ordered world, governed not by the whims of gods, but by patterns waiting to be understood. This realization, that reality has a rational structure discoverable through careful observation and thoughtful reflection, became the foundation of all subsequent Western thought. As we prepare to explore this philosophical landscape together, let us carry forward this essential insight. The universe invites our questions, and through patient inquiry, we may find answers that illuminate not just the world around us, but our place within it. The adventure of understanding has only just begun. In Miletus, around 585 BCE, Thales watched ships move across the sea and sensed a hidden unity beneath chaos. The scene unfolds as he asked what substance lay at the foundation of everything. His answer, water, was less important than the method, seeking natural causes for natural events. Today, we seek similar grounding in chaotic times, searching for what feels stable. Picture this ancient Greek philosopher standing at the harbor, watching merchant vessels cut through the waves. Unlike his contemporaries, who would attribute the ship's movement to Poseidon's moods or divine winds, Thales wondered, what if there was something deeper, something consistent that governed all motion and change? This single question, that perhaps reality had an underlying pattern waiting to be discovered, would birth an entirely new way of thinking about our world. He called this foundational substance the arche, the first principle from which all things arise. Water, he proposed, because he observed it transforming constantly, yet remaining fundamentally itself. What makes Thales revolutionary isn't that he chose water, but that he dared to choose at all. For centuries before him, explanations for natural phenomena lived in the realm of gods and goddesses. Lightning was Zeus's anger. Earthquakes were Poseidon's displeasure. Thales asked, what if we could understand these things without invoking divine intervention? This shift from mythological thinking to rational inquiry represents perhaps humanity's first conscious step toward science. He established what we now call natural philosophy, the belief that the universe operates according to discoverable principles rather than arbitrary divine will. In our contemporary chaos, 24-hour news cycles, social media storms, economic uncertainty, we still experience that same yearning Thales felt when watching those distant ships. What underlying principle could bring coherence to the apparent disorder? The wisdom in his approach lies not in his specific answer about water, but in his method. Look for patterns, seek causes, trust that beneath surface turbulence lies something stable and knowable. Viewers can apply this by training themselves to look for underlying principles rather than getting lost in surface confusion. In every chaotic situation, ask, what is the archer here? What fundamental pattern might be at work, waiting to be discovered? In ancient Ionia, Anaximander proposed a daring thought. What if the universe arises from the boundless, the Apeiron? Picture yourself standing beside this philosopher on the coast of Miletus, that ancient city nestled along what is now the Turkish shore. The year is perhaps 570 BCE, and the night sky stretches above you like an infinite dark canvas scattered with light. Anaximander, born around 610 BCE, watches the stars arc slowly overhead, tracing their eternal paths. He was the student of Thales, that first philosopher who had suggested all things come from water. But Anaximander's mind wandered further, reaching toward something more abstract, more mysterious. As he observed those celestial bodies moving in their silent dance, a radical question formed within him. Could the source of everything be something that itself has no beginning, no end, no definable boundaries? Could reality spring from the infinite itself? The word Anaximander chose for this primordial source was Apeiron, a term that carries within it the Greek prefix, a meaning without, and peras, meaning limit or boundary. The boundless, the unlimited. Unlike his teacher Thales, who pointed to something visible and tangible, water, as the origin of all things, Anaximander dared to suggest that the true source must be something beyond our senses entirely. Consider how revolutionary this was. He was perhaps the first thinker in the Western world to write his ideas down in prose, committing his speculations to text so that others might contemplate them. And what he wrote was this: the Apeiron is eternal and ageless, encompassing all the worlds. From it, the heavens and all the worlds within them arise. This infinite, indefinite substance contains within itself all opposites, all possibilities. Hot and cold, wet and dry, light and dark, all these emerge from and return to the boundless in an endless cosmic rhythm. Anaximander saw the universe not as static, but as a living process of becoming and dissolution, forever cycling through the Apeiron. His insight reveals something profound that still speaks to us across the centuries. Reality might be larger than any single element, any simple explanation. Think of how often we search for the one cause, the single answer, the definitive reason behind the complexity of our lives. We crave certainty like travelers craving solid ground. Yet Anaximander whispers across time that perhaps the ground itself floats upon something vaster, something we cannot fully grasp. In our modern world, we encounter this same humbling truth constantly. When we try to understand why societies change, why the climate shifts, why our own hearts feel what they feel, we discover layers beneath layers, causes behind causes, stretching back into an infinity we cannot fully map. The scientist peers into the subatomic realm and finds not solid particles, but probability fields, uncertainty woven into the very fabric of existence. The psychologist explores the human mind and finds depths that seem to recede the further we venture. Anaximander would recognize this modern wonder. He would nod gently and remind us that the cosmos was always thus, always emerging from something boundless that our categories cannot contain. And so, as we let Anaximander's vision settle within us, we might take something practical from his ancient wisdom. When you next encounter a situation that resists simple explanation, a relationship that confuses you, a decision whose right path seems hidden, a problem at work that seems to multiply the more you analyze it, remember the Apeiron. Rather than clinging to narrow certainty, allow yourself to embrace the vastness of possibility. Not every mystery needs immediate solving. Some questions are meant to be lived, explored slowly, their answers emerging in their own time from the boundless field of experience. Anaximander found peace in the infinite, not fear. He looked up at those ancient stars and saw not chaos, but a cosmic order arising from limitless potential. Let that thought rest gently within you now, the idea that you too exist within something vaster than you can comprehend, and that this vastness is not threatening but generative, the very source of all that exists and all that might yet become. What if everything is always changing, even as we try to hold on? Heraclitus observed flames flickering in a temple hearth and sensed that reality was a constant flow. His insight that we never step into the same river twice revealed transformation as the core of existence. Modern life's rapid shifts mirror this ancient truth. Viewers can find peace by accepting change rather than resisting it. Picture, if you will, the ancient philosopher in his coastal city of Ephesus, watching the flames dance before him in the sacred fire. Born to privilege yet choosing solitude, Heraclitus turned away from political power and toward the deeper mysteries of existence. He saw what others missed, that beneath the surface stability of our world lies an eternal dance of transformation. His cryptic style earned him the name the Dark One. But within that darkness lay profound illumination about the nature of reality itself. The river metaphor cuts deeper than we might initially imagine. When Heraclitus declared that no man ever steps into the same river twice, he wasn't simply observing physical change. He understood that even as the water flows, we ourselves are in constant flux, our thoughts, our bodies, our very cells renewing themselves continuously. This is the unity of opposites, he discerned. In every moment of stability, change is secretly at work. The fire he chose as the fundamental substance of the cosmos burns by consuming itself, transforming fuel into flame, matter into energy, being into becoming. In our age of rapid technological advancement and social upheaval, Heraclitus's ancient wisdom speaks with startling relevance. We resist change because it threatens our sense of security, yet this very resistance creates the suffering he observed. Just as the river flows whether we step into it or not, the transformations of our time, climate shifts, digital revolutions, changing social norms continue their course. The philosopher who called most people bad for living without understanding might be pointing to our collective reluctance to embrace the flow of existence rather than fighting against it. But there is profound peace to be found in Heraclitus's vision. When we release our attachment to permanence, when we align ourselves with the logos, the divine reason that orders the cosmos, we discover a different kind of stability. This is not the rigid fixity we crave, but a fluid wisdom that moves with change rather than against it. Like skilled dancers who find grace not by holding still, but by flowing with the music. We can find tranquility not by stopping the flow of life, but by learning to dance within it. And so, as the philosopher observed, in recognizing that everything is in constant becoming, we find the deepest form of peace. In the still deserts of Elea, Parmenides envisioned a world where true reality never changes. Here, in this ancient Greek colony nestled along the southern coast of Italy, a profound meditation on the nature of existence began to unfold. Around 515 BCE, this philosopher-poet composed his masterpiece On Nature, not as a dry philosophical treatise, but as a divine revelation received through the chariot of the sun goddess. Picture the vast, unchanging landscape of southern Italy, where the same olive groves have stood for millennia, where the same Mediterranean waters have ebbed and flowed with eternal rhythm. In this stillness, Parmenides perceived something that would shake the foundations of human thought, the possibility that everything we perceive as change, growth, decay, and movement might be nothing more than a magnificent illusion. His insight challenged all who came after him. Is change real or an illusion? Parmenides distinguished between what he called the way of truth and the way of opinion. In his revolutionary thinking, he argued that there are only two paths a thinking person can take. The first leads to the recognition that what is simply is and cannot not be. This is the path of reason, of pure logical necessity. The second path, which he warned against, follows the deceptions of the senses, leading us to believe in becoming, changing, and the reality of what is not. Imagine sitting in a quiet library where the truth of mathematical principles remains constant regardless of whether anyone is reading about them. The philosopher of Elea saw reality like this, as something unchanging, eternal, and absolutely certain. When you look at a tree and think you see it growing, Parmenides would gently correct you. You are witnessing the eternal present, not a transition between what was and what will be. The senses deceive us with their stories of transformation, but reason reveals the steady, unalterable truth of what simply is. This radical proposition that all is one, that everything which exists constitutes a single, indivisible, and eternal reality, created what we might call the first great philosophical paradox. If Parmenides is correct, then every moment of your life is actually an eternal present, and every thought of becoming is merely a confusion of what already is. The philosopher Heraclitus, his contemporary, would later famously declare that everything flows, that you cannot step into the same river twice, but Parmenides stood firm in his conviction that the river remains the same river, regardless of how we might perceive its movement. His logic was inexorable. If something comes to be, it must come from what is not. But what is not cannot give rise to what is, for nothing can come from nothing. Therefore, what is has always been, and will always be. This reasoning created what philosophers call the Eleatic challenge. How do we reconcile the evidence of our senses with the demands of reason? In our age of information overload, this ancient dilemma feels remarkably contemporary. Today, conflicting information bombards us from every direction. Social media algorithms feed us contradictory narratives, news sources present alternate realities, and even scientific consensus shifts with new discoveries. In this cacophony of change and uncertainty, Parmenides' invitation to ground ourselves in unchanging principles offers a profound gift. The ancient philosopher teaches us that beneath all the surface turbulence of daily life, certain fundamental truths remain constant. The law of non-contradiction, the principle that something cannot both be and not be at the same time, the reality that justice and injustice are distinct concepts regardless of how cultures may define them differently. When life feels uncertain and everything seems to be shifting beneath your feet, Parmenides whispers of a deeper stability, a realm of being where contradictions dissolve and truth stands eternal. Not as a denial of the importance of change and growth in our lives, but as a reminder that some things remain fundamentally true regardless of circumstances. In the stillness of that recognition, we find not just philosophical satisfaction, but a deep peace that transcends the fleeting nature of all appearances. And in that peace, we begin to glimpse the eternal perspective that the philosopher of Elea so patiently sought to reveal. What if everything around us is made of tiny, unseen particles? Democritus imagined atoms swirling in the void as he walked among fields of grain. His insight opened the idea that reality's structure is hidden beneath appearance. This mirrors modern discoveries that much of our world operates beyond perception. Viewers can apply this by remembering that unseen causes often shape visible outcomes. Picture this ancient philosopher in Abdera, around 460 BC. Known to his contemporaries as the laughing philosopher because he understood something profound about the nature of existence. Democritus spent his inherited fortune traveling to distant lands, from Egypt to Babylon, from India to Ethiopia, not merely for adventure, but to satisfy what he called his extraordinary thirst for knowledge. While walking through golden fields of grain, watching the wheat sway in the Mediterranean breeze, he began to imagine something extraordinary, that beneath the endless variety of our sensory world lies a fundamental simplicity, a universe built from indivisible particles he called atoms, moving eternally through what he termed the void. This wasn't just philosophical speculation. It was a radical reimagining of reality itself. Consider what this means for our understanding of existence. Democritus proposed that everything we perceive, solid stone, flowing water, the flesh of our bodies, is composed of these tiny, eternal particles that dance in empty space. Just as we cannot see the individual molecules in the air we breathe, yet we know they exist through their effects, so too did Democritus envision that the material world emerges from invisible building blocks. His revolutionary insight was that reality operates on two fundamental principles, the full, the atoms, and the void, empty space. This ancient Greek atomism would not be proven until modern science, nearly 2,400 years later, would confirm through sophisticated instruments what Democritus had glimpsed through pure reason and careful observation of nature's patterns. And here we find a profound connection between ancient wisdom and modern discovery. Today's quantum physics reveals that our reality indeed operates beyond immediate perception, from the invisible quantum fields that underwrite material existence to the dark matter that shapes galactic structures. Democritus understood that the deepest truths about our world often remain hidden from casual observation. When we struggle with complex outcomes in our lives, when relationships crumble despite our care, when unexpected opportunities arise from seemingly barren circumstances, we might remember the atomist's insight: invisible causes frequently shape visible results. The seeds of tomorrow's harvest are planted in today's unseen soil. Let this ancient vision guide you toward patience with mystery and faith in the reality that exists beyond the immediate horizon of your perception. When Pythagoras heard the tones of a blacksmith's hammer, he wondered why certain notes harmonized. This simple observation in the workshops of ancient Samos would transform how humanity understands reality itself. Listen carefully to those first notes of understanding. That moment when wonder meets reason. Pythagoras didn't just hear sounds. He heard the whisper of mathematical truth speaking through matter itself. The blacksmith's hammer struck iron, and from that collision of metal and air emerged not mere noise, but a deeper harmony that suggested the universe itself might be structured like a great song, waiting to be decoded. Around 500 BCE, this extraordinary figure, who called himself a lover of wisdom, the first to claim that title, made discoveries that would echo through millennia. Pythagoras founded a school in southern Italy where initiates lived in communal harmony, sworn to secrecy, believing that through mathematics they could understand the soul's journey through successive lifetimes. His teaching of metempsychosis, the migration of souls, was paired with a revolutionary insight that mathematical ratios govern not just music, but the movement of planets themselves. He proposed what later became known as musica universalis, the harmony of the spheres, suggesting that celestial bodies create an inaudible cosmic symphony based on precise mathematical relationships. But it was his investigation of musical intervals that revealed the profound connection between mathematics and reality. Through careful observation and experimentation, Pythagoras discovered that consonant musical intervals correspond to simple numerical ratios. The octave to 2-1, the fifth to 3-2, the fourth to 4-3. This wasn't merely about music. It suggested that numbers are the hidden architecture underlying all phenomena. The same ratios that create harmony in sound appear to structure the cosmos, revealing reality as a vast mathematical web where every part connects to every other through precise, beautiful relationships. His insight transcended the workshop and became a lens for seeing the universe as fundamentally mathematical in nature. Today, in our digital age, we see Pythagoras' revelation everywhere, in the algorithms that power our technology, in the precise ratios governing computer networks, in the mathematical patterns that scientists use to decode DNA and explore quantum reality. His discovery that numbers structure harmony speaks to us through our smartphones, our GPS systems, and our understanding of everything from stock market fluctuations to the rhythms of our own breathing. Consider this. Every morning you wake to an alarm set to mathematical precision. Every conversation travels through networks governed by numerical protocols. Every piece of music you enjoy follows the same harmonic principles he uncovered. The blacksmith's hammer still echoes in our lives, reminding us that harmony is not merely pleasant. It is the fundamental way reality organizes itself. And perhaps most profoundly, in recognizing these patterns, we can find our own place in the great mathematical song of existence, aligning our daily rhythms with the deeper harmonies that connect all things. What if wisdom begins not with answers, but with deeper questions? This profound insight emerged from the mind of Socrates, who wandered the bustling Athenian agora with an insatiable curiosity about the nature of human belief and understanding. Picture, if you will, the heart of ancient Athens, the marketplace where merchants sold their wares, politicians debated policy, and citizens gathered to discuss the affairs of the day. Into this arena of constant chatter and confident assertions stepped Socrates, not with solutions, but with an extraordinary gift for revealing the limitations of what people thought they knew. Socrates' revolutionary insight was that true wisdom requires first recognizing the vast territory of our ignorance. Through what would later be called the Socratic method, he would approach individuals with genuine curiosity about their beliefs, asking them to examine the foundations of their convictions. He didn't seek to embarrass or humiliate, but rather to create a space where people could discover for themselves the gap between their confident assertions and their actual understanding. This approach was so transformative that it became the foundation of Western philosophical inquiry, not just seeking answers, but learning to ask better questions. The beauty of this approach lay in its democratic nature. Unlike the sophists of his time, who charged fees to teach young men how to win arguments regardless of truth, Socrates insisted that wisdom was available to anyone willing to engage in honest self-examination. His famous declaration that the unexamined life is not worth living wasn't an academic abstraction, but a practical invitation to each person to pause and question their assumptions before acting upon them. This process of rigorous self-inquiry became his gift to philosophy, the understanding that wisdom emerges not from accumulating information, but from learning to think more clearly about what we believe and why. In our contemporary world, where information travels at lightning speed and social media encourages immediate reactions, Socrates' method offers something invaluable, the gift of thoughtful pause. When we encounter a news headline that triggers strong emotion, when we feel compelled to share an opinion without deep reflection, or when we find ourselves swept along by popular sentiment, we can apply the Socratic practice. Instead of asking, "How can I win this argument?" or "What opinion will make me appear wise?" we might ask, "What evidence supports this belief?" or "What assumptions am I making here?" This gentle questioning doesn't make us indecisive. Rather, it makes our convictions more authentic and our actions more aligned with genuine understanding. And so, like Socrates walking through the Agora, we can transform ordinary moments into opportunities for deeper wisdom. In 389 BCE, Socrates stood before the Athenian jury and accepted his fate calmly. Picture, if you will, the stone courtyard in Athens, where 500 male citizens had gathered, chosen by lot, as was the custom, to sit in judgment of a 70-year-old philosopher. The charges were two: asabeia, impiety against the gods of Athens, and the corruption of the city's youth. These were grave accusations, carrying the weight of death. And yet, the man at the center of this legal storm did not tremble. He did not beg. He did not offer elaborate defenses designed to appeal to the crowd's emotions. Instead, Socrates spoke with the measured clarity of someone who had already made peace with whatever outcome the day would bring. This moment, preserved for us through the accounts of his student Plato in the dialogue known as the Apology, would become one of the most significant events in the history of Western thought, not because of its legal verdict, but because of what it revealed about the relationship between integrity and mortality. To understand the weight of this trial, we must appreciate what Socrates was truly accused of. The formal charges spoke of impiety and corruption, but beneath these words lay something far more threatening to the Athenian establishment. For decades, Socrates had wandered through the Agora, the marketplace of ideas and commerce, engaging anyone who would speak with him in what we now call the Socratic method. That relentless questioning that peeled away assumptions until only truth, or the honest admission of ignorance, remained. He had described himself, according to Plato's account, as something like a gadfly attached to the city, stinging the sluggish horse of Athens into wakefulness. The young men of the city had watched him humble respected citizens, politicians, poets, and craftsmen alike, exposing the fragility of their claims to wisdom. And some of those young men had begun to imitate him, questioning their elders with the same uncomfortable precision. In a society still recovering from war, from the tyranny of the 30, from political upheaval, such questioning felt dangerous. Socrates had become a symbol of disruption, even if his only weapon was a question. When offered the opportunity to propose an alternative punishment, as Athenian law allowed, Socrates might have suggested exile. He might have offered to pay a fine. He might have promised to cease his philosophical activities, to retire quietly and trouble the city no more. Any of these options would have preserved his life. And yet, in a moment that still echoes across millennia, he refused to compromise the core of who he was. According to Plato's account, Socrates suggested that rather than punishment, he deserved to be maintained at public expense in the Prytaneum, the way Athens honored its Olympic victors. This was not arrogance. It was a profound statement about what he believed truly benefited the city, and when pressed, when the gravity of his situation demanded he retreat from his principles, he offered what may be the most famous line in all of philosophy: "The unexamined life is not worth living." Let those words settle into your consciousness. He was not speaking abstractly. He was saying that he would rather drink the hemlock than live as someone who had abandoned the pursuit of truth and virtue. His very existence had become inseparable from his philosophical mission, and to preserve his body at the cost of his soul's purpose would have been, to him, a kind of death far worse than the physical one he faced. This ancient courtroom drama speaks with startling relevance to our modern condition. Consider how often we face our own versions of Socrates' choice, smaller, perhaps, less dramatic, but cut from the same cloth. The pressure to conform to workplace expectations that contradict our values. The temptation to stay silent when we witness injustice, fearing the consequences of speaking. The daily negotiations we make between authenticity and acceptance, between who we truly are and who others would have us be. Social media amplifies this tension, creating environments where the wrong opinion can bring swift and severe consequences, where the safest path is often to echo the prevailing consensus rather than to question it. Socrates reminds us that there is something within us, call it the soul, call it integrity, call it our deepest self, that requires honoring even when, perhaps especially when, the cost is high. He did not ask us to seek martyrdom, but he did demonstrate that some things matter more than survival, more than comfort, more than the approval of the crowd. As we let this story settle into quiet reflection, consider what Socrates ultimately taught through his death. He showed us that the commitment to truth and virtue is not merely an intellectual position to be argued, but a way of being that must be lived, even unto the final breath. The hemlock cup he accepted was not a defeat, but a final lesson, that integrity, once compromised, cannot be easily recovered, but integrity maintained becomes immortal. The citizens of Athens voted to silence him, and in doing so, they ensured that his voice would echo through every generation that followed. Tonight, as you drift toward rest, carry with you this gentle truth, that honoring your deepest convictions, even in small daily choices, is how we keep the spirit of Socrates alive within ourselves. And in that honoring, we discover that the examined life is not only worth living, it is the only life that can truly be called our own. What if the world we see is only a shadow of a deeper reality? Let that question settle gently into your awareness. Like a stone dropped into still water, ripples spreading outward into the quiet corners of your mind. Plato, the great Athenian philosopher, posed this very question more than 2,000 years ago, and his answer would forever transform the way humanity understands existence itself. He imagined that beyond this world of constant change, beyond the fleeting sensations of sight and sound and touch, there exists a realm of perfect forms, eternal and unchanging essences that underlie every imperfect object we encounter in our daily lives. The chair you sit upon, the beauty you perceive in a sunset, the justice you seek in human affairs, these are not merely random arrangements of matter, but rather imperfect reflections, shadows cast by perfect ideals that exist in a dimension beyond our ordinary perception. In his dialogue known as the Republic, Plato presents us with perhaps the most powerful philosophical image ever conceived: the allegory of the cave. Imagine, he invites us, prisoners who have been chained since childhood in an underground dwelling, their necks and legs fixed in place so they can only gaze at the wall before them. Behind these prisoners burns a fire, and between the fire and the prisoners, people walk carrying objects whose shadows dance upon the cave wall. These shadows, these flickering images, are all the prisoners have ever known. They believe these shadows to be reality itself, for they have never glimpsed the objects that cast them, let alone the brilliant sunlight that exists beyond the cave's entrance. Plato suggests, with quiet profundity, that we ourselves are much like these prisoners. The world we perceive through our senses is not the truest reality, but merely shadows, imitations of the eternal forms that constitute what is genuinely real. And so, we can gently turn our attention to what Plato meant by these forms. The Greek word he used, idea or eidos, relates beautifully to vision and appearance, yet paradoxically, these forms cannot be seen with physical eyes at all. They can only be apprehended by the mind through reason and philosophical reflection. Consider a triangle drawn upon paper. No matter how carefully we sketch it, it will never be perfectly triangular. Its lines slightly curved, its angles minutely imperfect. Yet we understand what a perfect triangle is. We can reason about its properties with absolute certainty. This perfect triangle, Plato would say, is the form of triangle, existing eternally in a realm accessible only to thought. The same holds true for every quality and object, the form of beauty, the form of courage, the form of the good. These are not mere concepts in human minds, but real existences, more real in fact than the imperfect copies we encounter in our everyday world. Let that thought rest as we consider how urgently Plato's insight speaks to our modern condition. Today, we find ourselves immersed in a world of surfaces, of social media images carefully curated to project perfection, of news cycles that skim the surface of events without touching their deeper meaning, of consumer culture that promises fulfillment through endless acquisition of things. We scroll through shadows upon glowing screens, mistaking these flickering images for reality itself. Plato would recognize our predicament immediately. He would gently ask us, what lies beneath the advertisement's promise? What is the essence behind the political slogan? What deeper truth does the viral moment obscure? His invitation remains as vital now as it was in ancient Athens, to become philosophers, lovers of wisdom, who turn away from the cave wall to seek the light of genuine understanding. And so, Plato's teaching offers us both a challenge and a consolation. The challenge is to look beyond appearances, to question what we assume to be real, to seek the essence behind experiences rather than losing ourselves in their fleeting details. The consolation is this, that there exists something permanent beneath all change, something perfect beneath all imperfection, something true beneath all illusion. When you next encounter beauty, whether in a piece of music, a human face, or the quiet majesty of a starlit sky, pause and consider that you are glimpsing something eternal, a reflection of the form of beauty itself, shining through the world of appearances like light through a window. Let this understanding settle peacefully within you, a gentle reminder that reality is deeper than shadows, and that the mind's true home lies in the contemplation of what is everlastingly real. When Plato described prisoners mistaking shadows for reality, he revealed a timeless metaphor, one that has echoed through centuries of human thought, and one that speaks to us still, perhaps more urgently than ever. In Book 7 of his Republic, Plato presents what may be philosophy's most enduring image, a cave, deep and dark, where prisoners have been chained since childhood. Their necks and legs are fixed, preventing them from turning their heads, forcing them to gaze only at the blank wall before them. Behind them burns a fire, and between that fire and their immobile forms, unseen figures walk along a raised pathway, carrying objects. Puppets of men, animals and everyday things. These objects cast flickering shadows upon the wall, and for the prisoners, these shadows are everything. They are reality itself. The prisoners do not know they are watching projections. They cannot conceive of the fire behind them, or the walkway, or the figures who move in silence. When sounds echo through the cavern, the prisoners believe the shadows themselves are speaking. This is not ignorance born of stupidity, but of circumstance. They have never seen anything else. The shadows are their truth, their entire world, as complete and unquestionable as the ground beneath your feet seems to you right now. The scene unfolds as one prisoner is released from his chains, and what follows is not a story of immediate liberation, but of profound discomfort. Imagine this freed soul, rising for the first time, turning toward the source of light. The fire, so ordinary to those who walk freely, burns his eyes with unbearable intensity. He cannot look. Every instinct tells him to turn back, to return to the comfortable darkness he has always known. Socrates, speaking through Plato's dialogue with his brother Glaucon, tells us that if someone were to tell this freed prisoner that what he now sees is more real than the shadows, he would not believe it. He would resist. The pain would be too great, and the familiar darkness would call to him with the sweet voice of everything he has ever trusted. This is enlightenment, as Plato understood it. Not a gentle awakening, but a painful ascent. The philosopher, Socrates explains, is like this prisoner who must be dragged upward, step by agonizing step, toward the mouth of the cave. And when he finally emerges into daylight, his suffering only deepens. The sun blinds him completely. He must first look at reflections in water, then at objects in shadow, then at the moon and stars, before he can finally gaze upon the sun itself, the source of all light and, metaphorically, the form of the good, the ultimate truth that illuminates all understanding. This insight shows that enlightenment often requires discomfort, and here Plato speaks to something we recognize in our own lives. Consider how we live today, in an age of information that would seem miraculous to the ancients, yet we find ourselves in caves of our own making. Social media algorithms craft personalized realities for each of us, showing us only what confirms what we already believe. News sources multiply, each offering its own version of events, each casting its own shadows upon the wall. We scroll through feeds designed to capture attention rather than illuminate truth, and we mistake the flickering images for the whole of reality. Misinformation spreads not because people are foolish, but because we are, like Plato's prisoners, comfortable with familiar shadows. When someone offers us a different perspective, our first instinct is often resistance. The light hurts. We would rather return to the darkness we know. Plato's Republic describes what happens when the enlightened prisoner returns to the cave to free others. They mock him. His eyes, now accustomed to sunlight, struggle in the darkness. He seems confused, even foolish. The other prisoners conclude that the journey upward has ruined him, and they resolve never to leave. How often do we see this pattern today? Those who challenge comfortable narratives are dismissed, ridiculed, or ignored. The shadows remain more persuasive than the truth, because the shadows require nothing of us, no discomfort, no change, no painful adjustment of our eyes. And so we arrive at the heart of Plato's invitation to each of us. The Allegory is not merely a story about ancient prisoners in an imaginary cave. It is a mirror held up to your own mind, asking, what shadows do you mistake for reality? What comfortable certainties might dissolve if you were willing to turn around, to feel the burn of unfamiliar light, to climb toward truths that challenge everything you thought you knew? Courage, Plato suggests, is not just a virtue of soldiers and leaders. It is the virtue of anyone who dares to seek genuine understanding. This means questioning your own assumptions, sitting with the discomfort of uncertainty, and allowing your eyes to adjust to brighter truths even when the adjustment is painful. The cave is always with us. The chains are forged not of iron, but of habit, comfort, and the fear of what we might discover about ourselves and our world. Yet the ascent remains possible. Every moment offers the choice to gaze more intently at the shadows or to begin the slow, difficult climb toward the light. Let this image rest gently within you now. The cave, the fire, the painful brightness of the sun. And know that Plato believed the journey was worth every moment of discomfort, for only in the light can we truly see ourselves, each other, and the world as it really is. What if every event has multiple layers of explanation? Imagine standing before a beautiful marble statue in a museum. Most of us would see only what meets the eye, the finished sculpture carved from stone. But Aristotle invites us to look much deeper, to perceive the hidden architecture of reality itself. In his extensive studies of living nature, from the smallest seed to the largest organism, Aristotle discovered that everything that exists is woven from four distinct yet interconnected threads of causation. His revolutionary insight was that understanding purpose, not merely mechanism, unlocks the true nature of existence. And here we find ourselves, centuries later, facing complex problems that seem to resist simple solutions. Climate change, social inequality, personal career dilemmas, all crying out for this same multi-layered way of thinking that Aristotle first mapped out in his philosophical investigations. Aristotle's four causes form a beautiful framework for understanding any phenomenon. The first is the material cause, what something is made of. That marble statue is carved from marble. A seed grows from organic matter. But Aristotle knew this was only the beginning. The second cause is the formal cause, the pattern, the blueprint, the essence that gives something its identity. The sculptor's vision of what the statue should become, the DNA that determines how an acorn becomes an oak tree. The third cause is the efficient cause, the force, the agent, the process that brings change about. The sculptor's chisel striking the marble, the photosynthesis that transforms sunlight into growth, and finally, the fourth cause, the final cause, the purpose, the goal, the telos, toward which all the others are directed. Why was the statue carved? To honor a great leader. Why does the seed grow? To continue the life of its species. This is where Aristotle's genius becomes most apparent. Unlike his teacher Plato, who was fascinated by abstract forms existing separate from the material world, Aristotle insisted that we cannot understand purpose without examining actual things in their natural contexts. He spent years studying biology, observing how dolphins breathe air despite living in water, how plants orient themselves toward light, how animals behave in ways that ensure their survival. Each observation revealed not just mechanism, but meaning. The dolphin's need to surface is not merely a biological fact. It points to the essence of what it means to be an air-breathing mammal, even in an aquatic environment. This integration of purpose with process became Aristotle's distinctive contribution to philosophy, the recognition that understanding the why is as crucial as understanding the how. In our contemporary world, Aristotle's four-cause framework offers us a powerful tool for navigating complexity. When we face a personal decision, say, choosing between two career paths, we can examine the material cause, what skills, resources, time we're investing. The formal cause, what kind of person we want to become, what identity we're shaping. The efficient cause, the concrete actions we'll need to take, the steps we'll walk. And the final cause, what purpose this work serves in our life, what contribution we hope to make. Similarly, When we encounter social problems, a community struggling with unemployment, a family dealing with conflict, a nation confronting environmental challenges, Aristotle's framework reminds us that effective solutions must address all four layers. You cannot solve unemployment with job training alone, for instance, without also considering what kind of society we're building, what forces are creating the economic disruption, and what human purpose work serves in a meaningful life. Aristotle's search for causes reveals that reality is far richer than our immediate perception suggests. Every phenomenon, from the falling of a leaf to the rise of a civilization, contains depths of explanation waiting to be discovered. By learning to ask four questions instead of one, we step into a more complete way of understanding the world around us and our place within it. And perhaps this is Aristotle's greatest gift, the recognition that wisdom lies not in accepting simple answers, but in embracing the beautiful complexity of existence itself. When Aristotle asked what makes a life good, he observed people in the Athenian city striving for balance. He watched the merchants in the agora, the athletes in the gymnasium, the philosophers in their groves, and the citizens gathered in the assembly. And in all of this human activity, this ceaseless motion of daily life, Aristotle noticed something profound. The happiest among them, those who seemed most truly alive, were not those who possessed the most wealth, nor those who sought the most pleasure, nor even those who wielded the greatest power. No, the flourishing souls were those who had found a kind of harmony within themselves, a balance that allowed all parts of their nature to work together towards something beautiful. In his great work, the Nicomachean Ethics, named perhaps for his own son or possibly for his father, Aristotle set out to answer this most fundamental question: what is the good life for a human being? And his answer was eudaimonia, a word often translated as happiness, but meaning something far richer, something closer to flourishing, to living well and doing well. This was not a fleeting emotion, not the momentary pleasure of a fine meal or a beautiful sunset. Eudaimonia was the activity of the soul in accordance with virtue throughout an entire life. It was, Aristotle taught, the very purpose for which we exist. Just as a knife fulfills its purpose by cutting well, and a harpist by playing beautifully, so a human being fulfills their purpose by living virtuously. And virtue, he discovered, was not a single quality, but a constellation of excellences, each one a delicate balance between two opposing tendencies. This insight, the golden mean, showed virtue as a state between extremes. Consider courage, that noble quality we so admire. The person who fears everything and flees from every danger falls into cowardice, but the person who fears nothing and rushes headlong into every peril becomes reckless. True courage lies between these extremes, feeling the appropriate fear at the appropriate time and acting rightly despite it. The same pattern reveals itself across all the virtues. Generosity lives between the wastefulness of one who gives too much, too carelessly, and the stinginess of one who hoards everything. Temperance dwells between indulgence and insensibility. Even wit, that delightful social grace, finds its place between the buffoon, who will say anything for a laugh, and the boor, who refuses all levity. The golden mean is not a simple mathematical average, not a tepid compromise between passion and numbness. Rather, it is the precise point at which our actions become most fully human, most excellently ourselves. And this point, Aristotle acknowledged, differs for each person and each situation. What is courageous for a trained soldier may be reckless for an ordinary citizen. Finding the mean requires wisdom, practical judgment, what Aristotle called phronesis. Consider how this ancient wisdom illuminates our modern condition. Our age tempts us constantly toward excess or neglect. We might work until exhaustion, then collapse into complete passivity. We might consume entertainment endlessly, then feel guilty and deprive ourselves entirely. Our digital lives oscillate between compulsive checking and total disconnection. Aristotle's teaching whispers through the centuries. Seek the balanced path. Not the middle of indifference, but the dynamic center where your capacities express themselves most fully. Perhaps this means moderate exercise sustained over years, rather than extreme workouts followed by abandonment. Perhaps it means thoughtful engagement with technology rather than addiction or rejection. The golden mean is not a destination but a practice, a continuous adjustment as circumstances change, a lifelong cultivation of practical wisdom. And so, as we rest with Aristotle's ethics of flourishing, let this gentle truth settle into your awareness. The good life is not found in extremes. It is cultivated in the thoughtful middle way, in the patient practice of choosing well again and again until virtue becomes our second nature. Eudaimonia, that deep flourishing, awaits not in some distant achievement, but in the balanced living of each ordinary day. Let this wisdom be a quiet companion as we continue forward, knowing that every small choice toward harmony moves us closer to the life we were meant to live. What if serenity comes not from controlling life, but from mastering our responses? This question, so simple in its phrasing yet so profound in its implications, marks one of the great turning points in the history of human thought. For centuries, philosophers had grappled with the nature of reality, the pursuit of knowledge, and the essence of virtue. But now, we arrive at a philosophy that speaks directly to the weathered heart, to those who have known loss, uncertainty, and the relentless unpredictability of fortune. This is the Stoic turn, and it begins, as so many great transformations do, with a single individual who emerged from catastrophe with wisdom rather than despair. Zeno of Citium was born around 334 BC on the island of Cyprus, a crossroads of Greek and Phoenician culture. He was a wealthy merchant, comfortable in his prosperity, until fate intervened with characteristic indifference. On a voyage from Phoenicia to Athens, Zeno's ship was wrecked, and with it his fortune vanished beneath the waves. Imagine that moment, if you will. Everything you had built, everything you thought secured your place in the world, suddenly gone. Most would have seen this as ruin, but Zeno, wandering the streets of Athens in the aftermath, entered a bookseller's shop and encountered the writings of Xenophon about Socrates. He was so moved that he asked where he might find such wise men. The bookseller pointed to crates of Thebes, a cynic philosopher passing by, and so from shipwreck came philosophy, from loss came liberation. Zeno studied with the Cynics, but eventually forged his own path. Around 300 BC, he began teaching in a painted colonnade in Athens known as the Stoa Poikile, the painted porch. From this modest location, the Stoic school took its name. And here, Zeno offered a revolutionary insight. Inner freedom arises not from changing our circumstances, but from accepting what we cannot change. He taught that the universe operates according to a rational principle, a divine logos that governs all things. Our role is not to fight against this cosmic order, but to align ourselves with it. What lies outside our control, the actions of others, the weather, the rise and fall of empires, these we must accept with equanimity. What lies within our control, our judgments, our intentions, our responses to events, these we must cultivate with discipline and care. This distinction, so elegantly simple, became the foundation of Stoic resilience. Consider how this ancient wisdom speaks to our modern anxieties. Today, we are surrounded by uncertainties that mirror those ancient hardships. Economic instability, political turmoil, the endless stream of news designed to provoke fear and outrage. We scroll through our devices, absorbing the chaos of a world that seems perpetually beyond our control. And yet, the Stoics would remind us that this has always been the human condition. The specific sources of anxiety change, But the fundamental challenge remains. How do we find peace in a world we cannot master? The Stoic answer is to turn inward. You cannot control whether you will lose your job, but you can control how you prepare for uncertainty. You cannot control how others perceive you, but you can control the integrity of your actions. In focusing on what lies within your power and releasing your attachment to everything else, you discover a sanctuary that no external circumstance can breach. And so, the Stoic turn represents not an escape from life's difficulties, but a profound engagement with them. Zeno, rising from the ruins of his merchant career, understood that true wealth lies not in what we possess, but in how we respond to its presence or absence. His insight reframed resilience as a spiritual discipline, a daily practice of distinguishing between what depends on us and what does not. As we let this teaching settle into our awareness, we might notice how much of our suffering comes from fighting battles that were never ours to win. The Stoic path invites us to lay down those impossible burdens, gently, peacefully, and to discover that in surrendering the illusion of control, we find a freedom more enduring than any fortune the world could offer. In his peaceful garden, Epicurus asked whether pleasure might simply mean freedom from disturbance. Picture, if you will, a small enclosed garden in ancient Athens, where olive trees cast gentle shadows across worn stone paths. Here, surrounded by a few close friends and students, Epicurus would sit in quiet contemplation, challenging the very foundations of how his contemporaries understood happiness. The question he posed was revolutionary. What if pleasure isn't found in the chaotic pursuit of luxury, wealth, and endless desires, but rather in the profound simplicity of being free from mental and physical disturbance? This insight reframes happiness as calm rather than excess. Epicurus understood that the human mind, when caught in the relentless pursuit of more food, more wealth, more pleasure, becomes trapped in a cycle of dissatisfaction. Each desire fulfilled simply gives birth to a new one, like a fire that grows hungrier with each piece of fuel it consumes. But in this garden, surrounded by simple bread, water, and the company of genuine friends, he discovered something remarkable. The deepest pleasure emerges not from acquisition, but from the absence of want. When the mind is free from anxiety about what it lacks, when the body is free from pain and excess, when the spirit is free from the burden of endless desire, then and only then does true happiness reveal itself. Modern life's noise often obscures such simplicity. We live in an age of infinite distraction, where every moment is filled with notifications, advertisements telling us we need more, and a cultural narrative that equates success with accumulation. The smartphone in your pocket bombards you with thousands of messages daily, each one suggesting that your current state is insufficient, that you need this product, this experience, this upgrade to be complete. Social media shows you glimpses of others, curated lives, making your own appear somehow lacking. But Epicurus reminds us that this very noise, the constant buzz of desire and dissatisfaction, is the enemy of genuine happiness. The ancient philosopher understood that we don't need to escape to a garden to find peace. We need to create that garden within ourselves, cultivating the ability to be content with simple pleasures. Viewers can apply this by cultivating small daily moments of quiet contentment. This isn't about rejecting ambition or ambition entirely, but about recognizing the difference between necessary desires and unnecessary ones. When you eat your next meal, try eating it without scrolling through your phone, without watching television, without the constant hum of background noise. Simply taste the food. Feel gratitude for nourishment. Notice the textures and flavors. When you walk to work or run an errand, pause for just 30 seconds to notice something beautiful in your environment. A tree, the way light falls on a building, the sound of birds. These small practices, repeated daily, begin to create an inner sanctuary that no external circumstance can disturb. Epicurus called this state ataraxia, a deep, unshakable tranquility that comes not from having everything you want, but from wanting what you have and finding profound peace in that sufficiency. In the gentle quiet of this moment, let Epicurus's wisdom settle like soft rain on thirsty ground. True luxury, he teaches us, is not the abundance of possessions, but the abundance of peace. And that peace is always available to us, waiting in the spaces between our desires, in the pause between breaths, in the simple recognition that right now, in this moment, we are enough. What if living well meant rejecting all unnecessary conventions? This radical question cuts to the very heart of ancient Cynic philosophy, embodied most famously by Diogenes of Sinope. Picture, if you will, a man who chose to live in a ceramic jar on the streets of Athens, not from poverty or desperation, but as a deliberate philosophical statement. Diogenes possessed nothing but what was absolutely essential, and in this stark simplicity, he discovered something profound about human nature. His insight challenges our society's endless obsession with status, accumulation, and social approval. Today, in our age of consumer culture and social media validation, the ancient cynics offer us a mirror that reflects our own traps back to us. The word cynic itself comes from the Greek kynikos, meaning dog-like. And this wasn't merely an insult thrown at these philosophers by their critics. It became a badge they proudly wore. Like dogs, they lived shamelessly in public, slept wherever they found themselves, and rejected the artificial boundaries that society used to categorize and control human behavior. Diogenes would eat, sleep, and defecate in full view of others, not out of crude behavior, but as a demonstration that these natural functions shouldn't be sources of shame or private obsession. He understood that the artificial distinctions we create between proper and improper behavior were preventing people from living authentically. His famous public demonstrations, masturbating in the marketplace, carrying a lantern in daylight claiming to seek an honest person, were not mere spectacles, but carefully constructed philosophical performances designed to expose the absurdity of social conventions. At the heart of Cynic philosophy lies the revolutionary concept of autarkia, complete self-sufficiency that comes not from accumulating possessions, but from recognizing that our true needs are far fewer than society would have us believe. The Cynics understood that suffering comes not from lacking what we want, but from wanting what we don't truly need. They practiced a radical form of mental clarity, which they called atoufia, freedom from the smoke of false beliefs, conceit, and the endless mental chatter that keeps us trapped in cycles of desire and dissatisfaction. This wasn't about deprivation, but about clarity. By stripping away everything non-essential, they believed humans could access their natural state of reason and virtue. They saw themselves not as rejecting society out of bitterness, but as guardians of fundamental human wisdom, protecting the essence of what it means to live according to nature rather than social conditioning. In our contemporary world, we can see the echoes of Diogenes' insights in every aspect of modern life. Our consumer culture's endless messaging about what we need to purchase to be happy, successful, or complete mirrors exactly the social conditioning that ancient cynics rejected. Social media platforms that reward the performance of perfect lives, the constant pressure to present curated versions of ourselves online, the economic systems that require us to define our worth through productivity and consumption, all of these represent the same illusions that Diogenes spent his life dismantling. The Cynic practice of choosing authenticity over social pressure translates today into examining which of our desires are genuine needs and which are manufactured by advertising, peer pressure, or the endless pursuit of social validation. We might ask ourselves, in our rush to acquire, achieve, and impress, what essential wisdom about human flourishing are we sacrificing? The ancient cynics remind us that true freedom isn't found in having more, but in needing less, and that the courage to live simply in a complex world requires the same radical honesty that Diogenes demonstrated when he chose his ceramic jar over conventional comfort. When the skeptics questioned every claim, they revealed the value of intellectual humility. The scene captures their calm refusal to accept certainty without evidence. Their insight invited peace through suspended judgment. In an age of information overload, this remains vital. Viewers can apply this by resisting the urge to jump to conclusions. And so, we find ourselves in the presence of one of philosophy's most counterintuitive gifts, the art of knowing by not knowing, of finding certainty through systematic doubt. Picture, if you will, the ancient Greek philosophers known as the Skeptics, not as carping critics or perpetual doubters, but as serene guardians of wisdom. They discovered something profound, that the moment we stop insisting that we must have all the answers, we create space for something far more valuable, genuine understanding. The great Pyrrho of Elis, who lived around 300 BCE, pioneered what philosophers call the suspension of judgment, the epoche. Imagine the courage it required to stand before the great debates of his time and say, simply, "I do not know." But this was not intellectual weakness. It was intellectual strength refined into perfect balance. Pyrrho's student Timon observed how this stance of suspended judgment created something unexpected, ataraxia, the deep tranquility that comes from releasing the exhausting need to have opinions about everything. Later, Sextus Empiricus would codify this into a systematic philosophy, showing how the very act of questioning our assumptions could lead not to anxiety, but to peace. They discovered that certainty is often the enemy of growth, while doubt opens the door to genuine learning. In our modern world, drowning in an ocean of information, constant opinions, and competing certainties, the skeptics offer us a lifeline. Every day, we encounter headlines that demand our immediate reaction, social media posts that expect instant agreement or disagreement, and voices claiming absolute knowledge about everything from climate to consciousness. The skeptics teach us the revolutionary practice of the pause, not the pause of indifference, but the pause of wisdom. This is intellectual humility in action, the recognition that our first thought is rarely our best thought, that our initial emotional response is not necessarily our most reliable guide. When we practice this ancient art of suspended judgment, we discover what the Greeks called eutrapia, the ability to turn situations gracefully, to respond rather than simply react. We learn that peace often lives in the space between question and answer, in the quiet moment when we choose curiosity over certainty. The skeptics understood something we often forget, that the mind at rest is not the mind that's dead, but the mind that's truly alive. Their legacy reminds us that intellectual humility is not the enemy of conviction, but its foundation. True confidence grows not from the soil of absolute certainty, but from the rich earth of honest questioning. In this age of information overload, let us remember the gift of the skeptical pause, the moment when we choose to breathe before we believe, to wonder before we judge, to remain open before we close. For in that sacred pause lies not just our peace, but our wisdom. And now, let us carry this understanding forward, as our journey through the cave of illusions continues, one thoughtful question at a time. What if emotions are signals, not commands? This simple yet revolutionary question opens a doorway to one of ancient philosophy's most profound insights about human freedom. The Stoics, particularly the remarkable teacher Epicurus, discovered that our emotional suffering rarely comes from what happens to us, but from how we interpret what happens to us. Imagine emotions as a wise messenger tapping gently on your shoulder, trying to tell you something important about your beliefs, values, or assumptions. The Stoics taught that these messengers are offering us information, not issuing decrees we must obey. This fundamental shift, from emotion as master to emotion as teacher, becomes the foundation for a kind of emotional freedom that many of us have never known. In our modern world of constant stimulation and rapid response, this ancient wisdom feels more relevant than ever. Epicurus, who himself had been enslaved before becoming one of history's most influential teachers, understood this intimately. Born around 50 CE, he learned through bitter experience that external circumstances could not be controlled, but internal interpretation absolutely could. His famous teaching captured this insight perfectly. It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. But Epicurus went deeper than this often quoted wisdom. He taught that between any stimulus and our emotional response exists a sacred space, the space of interpretation where our true power lies. When someone cuts you off in traffic, for instance, the event itself is neutral. Your interpretation that they're disrespecting you, that life is unfair, that you deserve better, creates the emotional storm. The Stoics discovered that this interpretive process, this moment between trigger and response, is where human freedom truly resides. Today's world makes this Stoic insight incredibly urgent. We live in what researchers call an anxiety economy. Our devices, news feeds, and social media are designed to trigger immediate emotional responses before we have time for mindful interpretation. The Stoics would recognize this as the perfect storm for unnecessary suffering. Their solution wasn't emotional suppression or denial, but what we might now call conscious interpretation. They taught that emotions provide valuable information about our inner landscape, but they don't have the final say on our actions or our peace of mind. Think of it as consulting a wise advisor, rather than being ruled by a demanding supervisor. The emotion says, "I'm feeling threatened by this situation." You, the conscious interpreter, decide how to respond to that information with wisdom and compassion. The practical application of this Stoic wisdom begins with a simple but profound practice, the pause between stimulus and response. When you feel that familiar surge of anger, fear, or anxiety arising, instead of immediately acting or reacting, you pause and ask, what story am I telling myself about this situation? This isn't about positive thinking or forcing optimism, but about recognizing the interpretive nature of emotional experience. The Stoics discovered that most of our emotional suffering comes from automatic, unconscious interpretations rather than conscious, wise reflection. In our contemporary world, this might mean noticing when social media triggers comparison or inadequacy, then consciously choosing to interpret those feelings as signals about your values rather than commands to feel inferior. The emotional freedom the Stoics taught isn't about becoming unemotional, but about becoming the conscious author of your emotional responses rather than their unconscious victim. In the Symposium, Socrates describes a ladder of love rising from bodies to higher truths. Picture, if you will, this ancient gathering at the house of the tragedian Agathon in Athens, where men gathered to drink wine and contemplate love itself. Socrates, in his characteristic wisdom, recounts the teaching of a woman named Diotima, who had guided him in understanding the nature of Eros. This ladder of love, she explained, is not merely about romantic desire, but about the very structure of human longing and how it can be transformed into something transcendent. The scene reveals how desire can evolve into wisdom, and as we explore this teaching tonight, we discover how our own hearts carry the seeds of philosophical ascent. The ladder begins, Diotima taught, with love of a single beautiful body. But here is the profound insight. This initial attraction is not the destination, but merely the first rung. The lover learns to see beauty beyond the physical form, moving from appreciation of individual beauty to recognition of beauty in all forms. Then comes the crucial ascent. The lover begins to value beautiful souls over beautiful bodies, recognizing that wisdom and virtue are more enduring forms of beauty. This is not rejection of the physical, but rather a recognition that true beauty flows from within. The ascent continues until one contemplates beauty itself, not beautiful things, but beauty as an eternal principle that illuminates all lesser forms of beauty. Consider how this ancient insight speaks to our modern understanding of relationships and personal growth. Today, we see couples who have moved beyond mere attraction into deeper companionship, where shared values and mutual understanding create bonds that transcend physical presence. We witness parents whose love evolves from protective instinct to wisdom, teaching their children not just survival, but meaning. We observe friendships that transform from shared activities to shared purpose, where two people discover they are climbing towards similar truths. The insight shows that longing can lead us toward meaning, and our desires, when properly understood, become guides toward what genuinely satisfies the human heart. Modern relationships still echo this journey, whether we recognize it or not. The person who falls in love with another's passion for music discovers they are also falling in love with beauty itself. The individual who finds deep connection through shared values discovers they are climbing the ladder together. When we understand love as a path of inner growth rather than mere fulfillment, we approach our relationships with greater patience and wisdom. We begin to see that our partner's struggles are not obstacles to our happiness, but opportunities for mutual ascent. We recognize that our own capacity to love grows through service to another's highest potential. Tonight, as we rest, we might contemplate how our own desires are calling us toward greater understanding, and how the love we offer others becomes the light that illuminates our own path toward wisdom. What if friendship is the foundation of a good life? Aristotle observed different types of bonds and valued those grounded in virtue. His insight highlighted mutual growth as the highest form of connection. In today's fragmented world, such bonds are rare but essential. Let us journey into the ancient wisdom of the Stagirite, as he revealed in his Nicomachean Ethics that friendship is not merely pleasant companionship, but the very architecture of human flourishing. In the quiet halls of the Lyceum, where Aristotle walked among his students, he distinguished three varieties of human connection. The first, friendships of utility, arise from what we can gain from one another, like merchants who exchange goods, or colleagues who advance our careers. These bonds dissolve when the mutual benefit ends, for they rest not on the persons themselves, but on the advantages they provide. The second, friendships of pleasure, bloom like summer flowers built on shared enjoyments, witty conversations, or mutual entertainment. Yet these too wither when the source of delight fades, as our tastes change, and what once delighted now merely amuses. But there exists a third kind, more enduring than utility, more constant than pleasure, the friendship of virtue. This is the friendship between good people, those who admire each other's character not for what they can provide, but for who they are. Here, two souls recognize the divine spark of excellence in one another and choose to nurture it. Such friends become mirrors, reflecting each other's highest potential, calling forth the best within us simply by their presence. They share not merely activities, but aspirations, not merely time, but the profound desire to see each other flourish in the fullest sense of human excellence. In our age of digital connections and superficial associations, Aristotle's vision speaks with startling relevance. Social media offers us thousands of contacts, yet many remain profoundly lonely. We mistake quantity for quality, activity for intimacy. The philosopher teaches us that true friendship cannot be manufactured through shared interests alone. It requires the slower, deeper work of virtue cultivation. We must ask ourselves, do our relationships challenge us to become better? Do they call forth our courage, our wisdom, our compassion? Or do they simply confirm us in our existing patterns, however limited? The cultivation of such friendships begins with self-examination. We must first become the kind of person worthy of virtuous company, developing the character we would admire in others. Then, with patience and discernment, we seek those rare souls who share our commitment to growth. For in these sacred bonds, we discover not merely happiness, but eudaimonia, the full flowering of what it means to be truly human. Let this ancient wisdom guide you toward connections that elevate, challenge, and transform. The Greeks saw political life as a reflection of human character long before modern democracies formed. In the marble halls of Athens, beneath the Acropolis where democracy itself was born, citizens gathered not merely to vote, but to cultivate virtue through public discourse. The ancient Greeks understood something we often forget in our contemporary political debates, that the health of any society mirrors the moral character of its people. When Heraclitus spoke of government serving liberty, equality, and security, he was acknowledging that these noble ideals could only flourish when citizens themselves possessed wisdom, temperance, and civic courage. Scenes from Athens reveal debates about justice, equality, and power that echo with startling familiarity in our modern political landscapes. In the Athenian ecclesia, citizens would argue fiercely about how power should be distributed, how laws should serve the common good, and what constituted true freedom. These weren't abstract philosophical exercises. They were the practical challenges of governing human communities. The Greeks recognized that democracy itself required citizens of virtue, for as Aristotle observed, the same people who possessed the wisdom to choose their leaders must also possess the wisdom to govern themselves with justice and temperance. Today's political conflicts mirror these ancient tensions in remarkable ways. We see the same struggle between individual liberty and collective responsibility, the same tension between merit and equality, the same debate over what constitutes legitimate authority. The ancient Greeks would recognize our contemporary challenges, the way political movements can become corrupted by demagoguery, how economic inequality can undermine democratic participation, and how technological change can reshape the very nature of civic engagement. Yet their insight remains profound. Governance depends on virtue as much as structure. No constitutional framework, no matter how cleverly designed, can function well when citizens lack the moral foundation necessary for self-governance. This ancient wisdom offers us a gentle path forward in our modern political discourse. Instead of viewing civic engagement merely as a duty or burden, we might see it as an opportunity for moral growth. The chance to cultivate wisdom through honest dialogue, to develop empathy through listening to opposing viewpoints, and to practice courage by speaking truth even when it's difficult. We can apply this by choosing thoughtful dialogue over angry polarization, by seeking common ground while respecting genuine differences, and by remembering that political disagreements need not become personal enmities. The ancient Greeks understood that the soul of democracy lies not in its institutions, but in the character of its citizens. As we navigate our own political challenges, we carry forward this timeless insight that cultivating civic responsibility and thoughtful dialogue is not just good politics, but good philosophy, a way of living that honors both our individual dignity and our shared humanity. And so we find that the deepest lessons of ancient Greece speak not just to politics, but to the art of being fully human. What if the mind is shaped by habits of thought, This profound question, which seems to echo from the corridors of modern cognitive science, was actually being explored over 2 millennia ago in the philosophical schools of ancient Greece. The Greek thinkers didn't just observe that humans think. They rigorously examined how we form beliefs, how we reason, and how we can distinguish between sound judgment and mere opinion. Their insights into the mechanics of rational thought would prove remarkably prophetic, anticipating many discoveries that wouldn't emerge in formal psychology until centuries later. In our current era of endless information streams, algorithmic recommendations, and sophisticated persuasion techniques, these ancient insights feel almost uncanny in their relevance. Aristotle, in his groundbreaking work Prior Analytics, around 350 BC, developed what we now recognize as the world's first comprehensive system of formal logic, the syllogism. His insight was revolutionary. He realized that valid reasoning follows predictable patterns, regardless of the specific content being discussed. And all men are mortal. Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. This simple three-line structure revealed something profound about the architecture of rational thought itself. Meanwhile, the Stoic philosophers were developing their own approach to logic, focusing more on propositional reasoning and the principles of valid inference. Both schools understood that the mind doesn't simply absorb truth like a sponge. It actively constructs understanding through structured processes of reasoning. What makes this particularly fascinating is how closely these ancient insights align with modern cognitive psychology. Today, we understand that human reasoning is indeed shaped by what researchers call cognitive schemas, mental frameworks that influence how we process new information. Confirmation bias, availability heuristic, and other systematic thinking patterns that modern psychology has documented were, in essence, already being discussed by Greek philosophers who observed that people tend to seek evidence that confirms their existing beliefs. The ancient Greeks recognized something we're only too familiar with in our digital age, that belief formation is not purely rational, but influenced by habit, emotion, social pressure, and the skillful use of persuasive techniques. In our contemporary world, these insights resonate with particular urgency. Every day, we're bombarded with information designed to influence our thinking, from social media algorithms that curate our news feeds to targeted advertising that speaks directly to our psychological vulnerabilities. The ancient Greeks' careful study of rhetoric and persuasion seems almost prophetic when we consider modern techniques of manipulation. They understood that those who master the art of logical argument and persuasive discourse hold tremendous power over the beliefs and actions of others. Their warnings about the responsibility that comes with such knowledge feels remarkably prescient in our age of viral misinformation and manufactured consent. So how can we apply these timeless insights in our daily lives? The ancient Greeks would suggest beginning with intellectual humility, recognizing that our initial judgments may be influenced by bias or incomplete information. Practice the art of conscious reasoning by explicitly examining your thought processes. When forming beliefs, actively seek out perspectives that challenge your assumptions, much like Socrates did through his probing questions. Most importantly, develop what the Greeks called phronesis, practical wisdom that combines logical analysis with moral discernment. In a world where sophisticated systems vie for your attention and attempt to shape your beliefs, this ancient art of clear thinking becomes not just intellectually valuable, but personally liberating. The mind that understands its own patterns becomes far less susceptible to manipulation and far more capable of genuine understanding. The ancient search for virtue anticipated today's ethical dilemmas around technology. In Plato's Phaedrus, we find perhaps the first recorded philosophical conversation about the unintended consequences of innovation. The story unfolds as Socrates recounts the tale of Thales, inventor of writing, presenting his creation to King Thales. Thales proudly declares that writing will enhance memory and wisdom throughout Egypt. But Thales, with the wisdom of experience, sees deeper. This discovery will create the illusion of knowledge in those who use it, he warns, while actually weakening their true understanding. What strikes us as remarkably prescient is how this ancient king recognized something we struggle with today, that tools can simultaneously empower and diminish us. Each technological advancement promises to make us smarter, more efficient, more connected, yet often leaves us feeling more dependent, more fragmented, less capable of deep thought. The ancient Greeks understood what we are relearning in our digital age, that the character of the user ultimately determines whether any tool serves human flourishing or erodes it. Aristotle's concept of phronesis, practical wisdom, provides a framework for navigating these ethical territories. Unlike technical knowledge or theoretical understanding, phronesis involves the capacity to discern what is good in particular circumstances and to act accordingly. It's the virtue that helps us ask not merely, can we do this, but should we do this, and how should we do this wisely? Consider the modern dilemmas that would have been familiar to Aristotle. When algorithms determine who sees job postings or housing opportunities, we face questions of justice and fairness that require phronesis to navigate. When artificial intelligence assists in medical diagnoses or legal decisions, we need practical wisdom to balance efficiency with human judgment. When social media platforms shape public discourse, we require virtue ethics to consider not just what is profitable or convenient, but what promotes human flourishing and civic virtue. The ancient philosophers understood that every technological choice is ultimately a moral choice. When we design systems that prioritize engagement over truth, that optimize for profit over human dignity, that favor efficiency over wisdom, we are making character judgments about what we value most. The Stoics would recognize in our attention economy a fundamental misunderstanding of what constitutes the good life. The Epicureans would see how our devices, rather than bringing us closer to genuine pleasure and peace, often increase anxiety and comparison. This brings us to a crucial insight. The ancient virtue ethicists were not concerned primarily with what technologies we should create, but with what kinds of people we should become. Their wisdom suggests that ethical technology design begins not with technical specifications, but with cultivation of human virtues, justice, temperance, courage, and practical wisdom. When we approach technological development through the lens of character development, when we ask how our innovations shape human souls rather than just human behaviors, we begin to align our innovations with timeless insights about human flourishing. In our contemporary world, this ancient wisdom illuminates practical applications. When we design AI systems, we might ask not only about accuracy and efficiency, but about how these systems preserve human agency and dignity. When we create social media platforms, we might consider not only engagement metrics, but how these tools foster genuine community and meaningful connection. When we develop surveillance technologies, we might weigh not only security benefits, but how these systems affect human freedom and trust. The ancient insight remains profoundly relevant. Our tools reveal our values, but our character determines whether those values serve genuine human flourishing. As we stand at the threshold of even more transformative technologies, artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, virtual realities, the wisdom of the ancient philosophers offers us a compass. Character matters more than capabilities. Virtue matters more than velocity. Practical wisdom matters more than mere possibility. In choosing what we build, we ultimately choose what we become. And so, As we navigate the ethical complexities of our technological age, we carry forward the ancient understanding that the cultivation of virtue, the development of practical wisdom, justice, and character, remains the foundation upon which all other human achievements must rest. The cave of illusions grows more complex, but the path toward wisdom remains timelessly clear. What if the Stoics predicted the stress of modern life centuries ago? Their teachings on resilience, clarity, and inner peace feel designed for today's pressures. As we stand in the golden light of late afternoon, watching the relentless stream of notifications, the endless demands for our attention, the constant pressure to perform and produce, we might pause and wonder, did ancient philosophers somehow glimpse into our digital age? The Stoics did more than glimpse, they diagnosed. They saw that the human mind, regardless of era, would face the same fundamental challenges, the tendency to suffer more from imagined fears than actual events, the habit of confusing what we can control with what we cannot, and the profound tendency to disturb our inner peace through our judgments about external circumstances. Marcus Aurelius, in his private meditations, wrote of finding tranquility in the middle of a storm, and his words now echo through modern therapy rooms where cognitive behavioral therapists help patients distinguish between facts and interpretations. Albert Ellis, who pioneered rational emotive behavior therapy in the 1950s, drew directly from Stoic principles when he developed the ABC model. Activating events lead to beliefs, which in turn create consequences for our emotional well-being. The insight reveals how ancient wisdom aligns with contemporary psychology. Epicurus had been teaching the same fundamental truth 100 to 800 years earlier when he observed that it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. The Stoic recognition that our suffering often comes not from events themselves, but from our judgments about those events, has become the cornerstone of modern cognitive therapy. Many people now rediscover Stoicism as a guide to mental well-being, finding in these ancient practices a clarity that cuts through the noise of modern life. Consider the morning routine of a busy professional, checking emails before getting out of bed, immediately filling the mind with other people's priorities before having space to connect with their own values. The Stoic would recognize this as a violation of the fundamental principle of focus, what Epicurus called the discipline of desire, the practice of wanting only what is within our control. Modern research in psychology confirms what the Stoics intuited, that sustained attention to external demands without regular returns to our internal compass leads to chronic stress, decision fatigue, and a sense of being perpetually overwhelmed by circumstances beyond our influence. You can begin integrating small Stoic practices into daily routines, creating islands of ancient wisdom in your modern landscape. The evening review, practiced by Seneca and Marcus Aurelius, becomes 10 minutes before sleep, asking yourself what you did well, where you fell short, and what you'll do differently tomorrow. The morning intention setting becomes a simple practice of identifying what is within your control today and what is not, creating mental clarity before the day's demands arrive. The pause between stimulus and response, a gap that Viktor Frankl, who survived the Holocaust, called the space where freedom lies, becomes a conscious breath, a moment to choose your response rather than react from habit. In these small practices, we discover that the Stoic path isn't about suppressing emotion or becoming indifferent to life's challenges. It's about building an inner fortress of clarity and resilience that allows us to engage with the world from a place of strength rather than reactivity. As we close this segment, we carry forward the understanding that wisdom doesn't age. It simply waits patiently for us to remember what we already know. The Greeks asked questions that still echo through our lives today. From the bustling agora of Athens to the quiet courtyards of their philosophical schools, these ancient seekers of wisdom discovered something profound that we often forget in our modern world. Their insight was revolutionary, yet surprisingly simple. Wisdom grows when diverse perspectives meet. Imagine, if you will, the great philosophical schools of ancient Greece, not as isolated islands of thought, but as interconnected threads in a vast tapestry of understanding. The Stoics found wisdom in accepting what lies beyond our control, while the Epicureans discovered peace through modest pleasures and deep friendships. The Platonists sought eternal truths in perfect forms, while Aristotle explored the empirical world with careful observation and reason. Each approach seemed different, sometimes even contradictory, yet beneath these surface differences, a beautiful unity emerges. This unity reveals itself when we understand that all these philosophical traditions were pursuing the same fundamental goal, eudaimonia, often translated as flourishing or living well. Whether through virtue, pleasure, knowledge, or balance, the Greeks recognized that human life thrives when we engage thoughtfully with existence. They understood something that our contemporary world has largely forgotten, that fragmentation and isolation are illusions. Just as a symphony requires many different instruments playing in harmony, wisdom emerges from the symphony of diverse perspectives brought together in thoughtful dialogue. The great philosophical debates of ancient Athens were not competitions to prove who was right, but conversations that revealed deeper truths through disagreement and synthesis. Modern fragmentation often hides this unity. In our age of specialized knowledge and social media echo chambers, we have learned to mistake our particular perspective for the whole truth. We divide into camps, scientific versus spiritual, individualistic versus communitarian, traditional versus progressive, without remembering that each approach holds a piece of the greater puzzle. The Greeks understood that wisdom emerges not from the certainty of any single view, but from the ongoing dialogue between different ways of understanding. Their academies and schools were designed precisely for this purpose, to bring together varied minds in patient conversation, allowing truth to emerge through careful reasoning and mutual respect. They knew that the deepest insights often come not from perfect agreement, but from thoughtful disagreement that leads to deeper understanding. You can apply this ancient insight in your own life by embracing learning from multiple sources with openness. When you encounter a difficult situation, instead of immediately choosing one perspective, consider what wisdom each tradition might offer. What would the Stoics suggest about what you can and cannot control? How might the Epicureans approach this with mindful attention to genuine pleasures? What observations would Aristotle make about the specific circumstances? What eternal principles might Plato help you discern? By cultivating this habit of engaging multiple perspectives, you participate in the great Greek tradition of philosophical dialogue. In this way, you become part of an unbroken chain of human wisdom, stretching back thousands of years, contributing your own voice to the ongoing conversation about how to live well. The questions that echoed through ancient Greece continue to echo through your life today, and in asking them with openness and curiosity, you join the most ancient and noble of human pursuits, the search for wisdom that leads to flourishing. What if philosophy is not abstract but a practice for the soul? The ancient thinkers treated daily reflection as essential to living well. Their insight highlights the importance of inner discipline. Today's distractions make this more challenging than ever. Viewers can apply this by creating simple daily rituals of reflection. The Greeks understood something profound that we in our digital age have nearly forgotten, that philosophy is not merely an intellectual exercise, but a way of being in the world. Socrates himself exemplified this through what we might call daily philosophical hygiene. those quiet moments of self-examination that transform ordinary existence into a contemplative practice. Consider how Socrates would begin each morning not with news or social media, but with a gentle inquiry into the state of his own soul. The examined life he championed was not a burden of constant self-criticism, but rather an invitation to cultivate inner awareness. In the same way that we maintain our physical health through daily habits, the Greeks believed we must tend to our spiritual and moral development through consistent reflection. This practice was seen as essential to eudaimonia, that state of flourishing that comes from living in accordance with virtue and reason. The Stoics later would formalize this into what they called the evening reflection, where one reviews the day's actions and considers how to improve tomorrow's choices. In our contemporary world, where attention is fragmented across countless digital demands, this ancient wisdom offers a sanctuary for the overstimulated mind. The practice is beautifully simple. Begin each day with 5 minutes of quiet contemplation, perhaps asking yourself what kind of person you wish to be today. End each evening with gentle reflection on your choices, not as judgment, but as conscious awareness. The Greeks understood that these small moments of pause create what we might think of as moral muscle memory, the gradual shaping of character through consistent, mindful attention to our inner landscape. Like tending a garden, the daily cultivation of awareness allows virtue to flourish naturally, without force or pretense. This approach to philosophy transforms abstract concepts into living wisdom. When we approach each conversation, each decision, each moment of challenge with the philosophical awareness that our lives are temporary expressions of deeper values, we begin to embody the very insights the ancient Greeks sought to understand. The goal is not to become perfect, but to develop the capacity for ongoing refinement, that beautiful process of becoming more fully human through conscious, daily attention to what matters most. In creating these simple rituals of reflection, we participate in a tradition that has guided seekers for over 2 millennia, finding meaning not in grand gestures, but in the gentle, persistent cultivation of wisdom in everyday life. And so, we discover that philosophy's greatest gift is not knowledge to be acquired, but wisdom to be lived, a daily practice of becoming more fully ourselves, one thoughtful moment at a time. The journey through ancient philosophy shows wisdom as an ongoing process. Scenes of questioning, learning, and refining illuminate the path. The insight is that wisdom is not a destination, but a way of moving through life. In modern times, we still search for meaning amid complexity. Viewers can apply this by approaching life as a gentle unfolding rather than a race. This is the profound realization that emerges from our long philosophical journey together, that wisdom resides not in having all the answers, but in maintaining the courage to keep asking meaningful questions. The ancient Greeks understood this beautifully. Socrates spoke of wisdom as the recognition of our own ignorance, a profound humility that keeps the mind open and questioning. His method of gentle inquiry was not about winning arguments, but about illuminating truth through patient exploration. Aristotle distinguished between theoretical wisdom, what he called sophia, and practical wisdom, phronesis, the kind that helps us navigate the complexities of daily life with moral discernment. Both forms of wisdom require what the Greeks called metanoia, a turning around of the mind, a continuous transformation of how we see and understand the world around us. Picture wisdom as a river rather than a mountain peak. A river flows continuously, sometimes calm, sometimes turbulent, always moving, always becoming something new. The river doesn't arrive at wisdom, it is wisdom in motion. In our modern world, with its endless streams of information and opinions, this ancient insight feels more relevant than ever. We are surrounded by voices claiming to have reached the summit of understanding, offering final answers to life's deepest questions. But the wisdom traditions remind us that the real treasure lies not in the destination, but in the quality of attention, curiosity, and compassion we bring to each moment of questioning. And so, as we prepare to close our philosophical journey tonight, we find ourselves back where we began, at the beginning of understanding. The ancient wisdom traditions offer us not a map to certainty, but a compass for navigating uncertainty with grace. They teach us that the questions we ask are more important than the answers we claim to have found. In your daily life, whether you're facing a difficult decision, contemplating a relationship, or simply wondering how to live more meaningfully, remember that you already carry within you the capacity for wisdom. It grows not through accumulation, but through cultivation, through the gentle, patient practice of paying attention, asking better questions, and remaining open to the deeper truths that emerge when we approach life with wonder rather than certainty. This is the path toward wisdom, a lifelong practice of becoming more fully human, more deeply aware, and more compassionately engaged with the mystery of existence. And with that beautiful understanding, we rest now in the quiet confidence that wisdom, like love, is not something we possess, but something we practice, one gentle moment at a time. What if the final teaching is simply to see clearly and rest calmly? After all these hours together, wandering through the gardens of Athens, sitting in quiet contemplation with Socrates, ascending the heights of Platonic forms, and walking the measured paths of Aristotelian virtue, we arrive at last at something beautifully simple. The ancient Greek thinkers, across their centuries of inquiry, have invited us to do one essential thing: to step beyond the cave of shadows into the gentle, embracing light of understanding. And here, at the end of our journey, that light feels neither blinding nor harsh. It feels like home. In Plato's Republic, he describes prisoners who have spent their entire lives chained in a cave, watching shadows flicker upon a wall, believing those shadows to be the whole of reality. When one prisoner is finally freed and led toward the cave's entrance, the light hurts at first. His eyes, so accustomed to darkness, struggle to perceive anything clearly. Yet Plato tells us that gradually, slowly, his vision adjusts. First he sees reflections in water, then the objects themselves, and finally, he can gaze upon the sun, the source of all illumination. This allegory is not merely about intellectual knowledge. It is about the patient transformation of the soul. The Greeks understood that wisdom cannot be rushed. It grows slowly and softly, like dawn spreading across a sleeping world. Each insight we have gathered tonight has been a step closer to that cave's opening. Consider how relevant this ancient teaching remains in our contemporary world. We live surrounded by flickering screens, endless notifications, and a constant stream of images vying for our attention, modern shadows dancing upon digital walls. The restlessness of our age often prevents us from pausing, from truly seeing. Yet the Greek philosophers remind us that clarity requires stillness. Today, when you feel overwhelmed by information, when anxiety whispers its familiar worries, you might recall this teaching. Step back, breathe, and allow your inner vision to adjust. The light of understanding is always there, patient and unchanging. What changes is our willingness to turn toward it. Each moment of quiet clarity you cultivate, whether in the morning before the day begins or in the evening as it winds down, is a small liberation from the cave. The philosophers we have journeyed with tonight, from the first wondering observations of Thales to the ethical refinements of the later schools, all shared one profound conviction: that the human mind is capable of understanding reality, and that this understanding brings peace. Socrates taught us to question, not to create confusion, but to dissolve illusion. Plato showed us that beyond appearances lie eternal truths. Aristotle grounded us in the careful observation of the world we inhabit, and the later philosophers, the Stoics, Epicureans, and Skeptics, offered practical wisdom for living with tranquility. Together, they form a chorus of voices across time, all gently saying the same thing. You are capable of seeing clearly. You are worthy of inner peace. And so, dear friend, as our journey through ancient Greek philosophy comes to its gentle close, let this final teaching settle into your heart like evening light settling upon still water. You do not need to strain toward wisdom. You need only allow it to unfold within you at its own pace, in its own time. The cave is behind you now. The shadows have lost their power. What remains is the soft, steady glow of understanding, a light that will be there whenever you choose to remember it. Rest now in that quiet clarity. Let your breath slow. Let your thoughts drift like clouds across a twilight sky. The ancient philosophers have given you their gift, and it is simply this, to see clearly and to rest calmly in the light.